Honestly, there is nothing harder for me as a speaker than to watch the testimonies of clients before I come on stage. And, sometimes when I'm with my friends, I'm called the other Melissa. And I will tell you tonight, I am more than okay with being just the other Melissa. Because frankly, even though it's a blessing for me to be here and share with all of you, and I hope that you're blessed by what I have to share with you tonight, I will tell you, Melissa, that is the most powerful testimony I've ever seen from anyone who was served by a pregnancy center, and I do this all the time. So can we give Melissa another round of applause? And your Landon is amazing. What a sweetheart. I know all of you will take away from tonight that laugh of his, that sparkle in his eye. And I am just so grateful that Melissa can live out her life knowing that she gave him life, even though I know it hasn't been easy. But I always tell people we were never promised an easy life. What we were promised is that we would never be forsaken. Those are two very different things that I think get very confused in our world. But it's a blessing for me to be here tonight. And on kind of a light note, have I ever met the director of a pregnancy center who had the personality of Tim Stickle? That is the question. I knew that Tim had a lot of personality the first time that I spoke to him on the phone. But then to meet Tim in person, you all are very blessed to have this man running the pregnancy center. And I certainly know why there's 7 women behind him, right, ladies? And it is a blessing for me to be here tonight because the truth is, I shouldn't be standing here at all. 35 years ago, my mother took a different path than the one that Melissa took in her life. 35 years ago, my biological mother, who was a college student, 19 years old, unmarried at the time, found herself with an unplanned pregnancy. And much like what Melissa experienced in her own life, there were people in my mother's life who made it clear that terminating the pregnancy was the only option they saw for her. What I know now is that, like most women in our world, my mother didn't have much of a choice when it came to having her abortion. We hear that word so much, but if you look at statistics, they tell us that over 60% of women internationally report being coerced into having an abortion. It's not their choice. It's the choice that's made available for them. And what I know now is that when my mother entered St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, to end her pregnancy with me, it wasn't her choice. It wasn't my father's choice. What I know now is that it was very well-intentioned family members, my mother's parents, who somehow thought that having a child at the age of 19 would change too much. Those very well-intentioned people helped make the decision that abortion was the only option available to my mother. And so 35 years ago, my biological mother underwent a saline infusion abortion. I know many of you who have been involved in pregnancy centers and pro-life work for a long time may have heard of the saline infusion before. But for those of you who aren't aware, I apologize, because I'm going to share a little bit about it with you, and I know it's not a lot of fun to hear about. But the saline infusion abortion my mother underwent involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid that surrounded me in the womb. The intent of that toxic salt solution was to scald me to death from the outside in. If you actually look it up on the internet, you can read about how children like me are called the red-skinned or the candy-appled babies because it burns the skin, turns it bright red as it peels it away and moves internally into the organs. My mother's abortion should have taken place over only about 72 hours. But for some reason, my mother's abortion took place over 5 days. And over 5 days, I soaked in that toxic salt solution, meant to scald me to death. And on the 5th day of my mother's abortion procedure, she went back to the hospital and had her premature labor induced with me. All of this was routine. You know, sadly, over those 5 days, not only did I fight for my life, but I know my mother had to wait for the sign that the life inside of her had been effectively snuffed out. And I can't imagine what it was like for my mother over those 5 days. And then to go back to the hospital on the 5th day and have her labor induced with me, knowing what the outcome should be. I was delivered at St. Luke's Hospital on August 29th of 1977. And from what I've been told by the medical professionals, many of whom I've met personally in my life, they initially believed that that saline infusion abortion had successfully ended my life. And they left me for dead in my mother's hospital room. I would have been disposed of later, like tens of millions of children before me and tens of millions of children after me. But what happened next wasn't routine. By the grace of God, as I was left for dead in my mother's hospital room, there was a nurse still tending to my mother, making sure she was doing okay. And that nurse heard the weak grunting noises emanating from that little girl they had left as a successful abortion. And that's when they realized that it had not succeeded in ending my life. I had been aborted, but I was born alive. And that's when those medical professionals did something that some people in our world think is unthinkable. They provided me with medical care. I hope that's not unthinkable to anyone in this room. We know that what those medical professionals did for me is the same thing that the pregnancy center is doing every single day, which is saying, yes, Lord, whatever comes across our path today, whoever it is we're called to serve, yes, Lord, we will do whatever it takes to touch them and hopefully save a life and transform a life. And those medical professionals said, yes, Lord, that day. And they provided the medical care that ultimately sustained my life. Can we give them a round of applause? I am so thankful for them. You know, they didn't have to legally do that for me that day, but they said yes. And I know you may be wondering the same thing that people do around the world when I share that part of my story. When you know what should have happened to me in the womb, you think, is there something we're missing? Right? It's okay. There's lots of questions when it comes to lives like mine. The truth is, when I initially survived, the doctors didn't believe I would continue to live for very long. When my mother had her abortion, she thought she was less than 5 months pregnant with me. But the fact that I was able to live, and I weighed almost 3 pounds, I was 2 pounds 14 ounces when I survived, it pointed to the fact she was much further along in her pregnancy than what she had imagined. Talk about the power of ultrasound through the pregnancy center, right? We now have the opportunity to show women something my mother wasn't able to see. The heartbeat, the fingers, the toes, everything that makes up their child, and what a difference it makes. We've heard that already tonight. But my mother thought she was less than 5 months pregnant. The truth is, she was probably almost 8 months pregnant with me when she had her abortion. When I finally obtained my medical records in recent years, one of the first notations by a doctor was that I looked like I was almost 31 weeks gestation when I survived. And I know that's when we all shake our heads and say, oh, that breaks our heart, Lord, as it should. But it should break all of our hearts regardless of whether I was 31 weeks or 31 days. And again, that's the power of ultrasound. That's the power of the education that women and men receive when they walk through the doors of the pregnancy center. I only wish my mother had been given that opportunity. But when I survived, the doctors didn't believe I would continue to live for very long. I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I suffered from severe respiratory and liver problems. I suffered from seizures for an extended period of time. I was too weak to suck from a bottle, and so I was fed through IV lines in my head. I required multiple blood transfusions. and the prognosis for my future was very bleak indeed. And I know that we live in a world that somehow wants to say that only certain lives are worth saving and only certain lives are worth loving. But I will tell you that when my adoptive parents received the phone call about the little girl who had survived a failed abortion, who probably wouldn't live for very long, and if she did, she would require great medical care throughout her life, they didn't hesitate for a second to open their hearts and their home to me. I am so grateful for my parents. And the first time I met my parents, I was still in the neonatal intensive care unit. And my parents, if you ever have the opportunity to see interviews that they do with me on television or hear us on radio, you will hear my parents tell the story of how the first time they laid eyes on me, the little girl fighting for her life in an incubator, the first time they laid their eyes on me, they fell in love with me. And I'll tell you, I wasn't that pretty of a baby. It's okay. The pictures are all over the internet. You can see them. I was this little wrinkly girl full of wires fighting for my life. But they saw God's inherent beauty in me. And my mother always tells the story of how the first time she held me in the palm of her hand, because that's where I fit at the time. The first time she held me, she knew I was going to be okay. They believed in me. Even though the doctor said I would likely be blind and deaf and suffer from emotional and mental disabilities, they believed that I would be healed. And I am. I stand before all of you tonight perfectly healthy. I am one of those few survivors who has no long-term health consequences as a result of surviving an abortion. But I know it wasn't just my parents' love and belief in me that healed me and made me the person that I am today. I also was blessed with medical professionals who rallied around me. I've had a long-term relationship with one nurse in particular, and I know how they gave me a name when I was left nameless for months. They knitted me clothing and booties that I still have today. They fed me from a bottle when they were told not to do so. Another group of people that said, yes, Lord, here is someone in need and we will care for them, just like the people here at the pregnancy center do every single day. And I truly believe that those medical professionals and my family loved me into life. And that's what your pregnancy center is doing every single day, by loving the women who walk through the doors, loving them into life, and thereby loving their children into life. And I am so thankful for that. So thankful for what you do. And I was loved and healed so powerfully that I went home to my family in Iowa just 3 months after I survived the abortion meant to end my life. That is miraculous indeed. I know that. But I also know that their love and their care and people's prayers healed me mightily. And I grew up in a home where I thought I had a pretty normal life. Adoption was the normal fabric of our family. My adoptive parents struggled with infertility for over 15 years of their marriage. So they adopted my older sister. She's from another family. And then they adopted me no matter what they were told about what my life might be like. And then lo and behold, after 15 years of infertility, along came my little brother. My brother is 7 years younger than I am. And our parents always did such a great job of helping us understand from our youngest age that we were blessed. We were blessed by God that our biological parents, in addition to our adoptive parents, loved us. We knew that growing up. And adoption was so normal that when my little brother came along, we actually couldn't understand why they had him. You can catch some interviews that my brother does. He's kind of like Tim, we'll put it that way. But my brother has some colorful things to share about what it was like growing up. And my brother, certainly one of the things he shares is that we kind of had a bad joke with him growing up. We used to say to him, you know, they had you. Yeah, you can see where this one's going, right? They chose us. And I know in some places that may sound like some children are not wanted. It's just a really poor adoption joke. But that's how special and loved we felt. We knew that we were chosen by our parents, and our parents were chosen by God to be our parents. And so that was our normal growing up, being adopted, being loved. I also grew up knowing I had been born prematurely. It never seemed like a big deal to me. But then the truth about who I really am came to light in the most unthinkable way when I was a teenager. When I was 14, my older sister found herself with an unplanned pregnancy. My sister was 18, but she was still in high school. And even though we were raised in a home where we knew about the sanctity of life, where we knew that adoption was such an amazing gift, like so many women, regardless of age, my sister contemplated having an abortion. You know, Melissa's words tonight really kept resonating with me because I not only heard them from my sister, but I hear them from women around the world. The pressures, the concerns of what life is going to look like, what people are going to think, what they're going to say, what kind of losses might you incur. And my sister experienced those same feelings and had those same thoughts at the age of 18. But I am so happy for my sister that she knew that no matter what, she had someone to turn to. Just like Melissa ultimately knew she could turn to the pregnancy center, who my sister had to turn to was our parents. She knew that they weren't going to agree with the choices that put herself in that position, but they would love her unconditionally. And so a little over 21 years ago, my sister told our parents about her pregnancy. And a little over 21 years ago, they told her the truth about my life and the attempt to solidify to her what the sanctity of human life truly meant, and to help her understand the consequences of every decision we make. I kept thinking about that too, Melissa, tonight. You touched on that. You know, every decision, every choice has a consequence. And so my sister found out the truth about me. And like any good teenage sister, she didn't keep a secret from me for very long. Right? Those of you that have sisters know what this is like. She didn't tell me everything, but she said some words that changed my life forever. She said, "You know, Melissa, at least my parents wanted me." And you can imagine what that felt like. Having grown up in a home where all I knew was that I was equally loved as she was, I couldn't imagine why she would say something like that. And so it was a little over 21 years ago that she encouraged me to seek the truth from our parents. And I did. And it was on a fall night. I waited up for our mother and I told her those words that had been spoken to me. And I'll never forget the look I saw on my mother's face. She was in so much pain. What I know now is that my parents never wanted me to find out the truth. They were afraid of how it was going to affect me. And so they never thought the truth was going to get back to me. And so that night, my mother had to speak the words that changed my life, and they've now changed the world forever. She said, "Melissa, your mother had an abortion during her pregnancy with you, and you survived it." And I know it's hard for people to understand what it must feel like to be me, especially at the age of 14 when we know life is rather difficult in the first place. And I will tell you the closest description I have to it is like when you're a little kid and you're swinging and you fall off the swing and you get the wind knocked out of you and everything hurts. Everything. And you can't breathe. That's what that night was like for me and for my mother. I can't even tell you how many hours I sat on the couch and clutched her and sobbed. And my tears were not only for me, but my tears were for the children like me who aren't given any of their opportunity to come into this world. My tears were also for my family, because even though that night I felt a flash of anger that I had never felt before, I didn't stay angry with them for very long, because God made it so clear to me I have nothing to be angry about. And it's true. I am so blessed to be alive. I am so blessed with the gift of a family and the gift of health. I have nothing to be angry about. What I felt that night was incredible sadness for them. that they were put in the position that abortion was the only option for them. I felt great sadness for them, thinking about how they must have felt the rest of their lives. Lots of people think maybe it's brought joy to my parents to know that I lived. But knowing that I lived doesn't erase what happened in the first place. And so I felt such sorrow for them. In that moment of time, I also felt great purpose. Knowing that God obviously had an amazing plan for me. But I'm not going to stand in front of you tonight and say it's always been easy. And that I accepted this calling at that moment in time. Because I would suspect some of you tonight have gone through similar experiences. And maybe it involves the pregnancy center in some way. You know that God is calling on you to get involved. Maybe it's as a prayer partner or volunteering your time. Or maybe it's through what you're going to give tonight to the ministry. And you're thinking, you must have the wrong person, Lord. You want me to do what? No, I don't have the gifts to do that. I don't have that particular skill. Even though I knew God had an amazing purpose for my life, I always thought, I'll do everything, Lord, that you ask me to do. Just not public speaking. Who wants to do that? Right? Number one fear of most people in the world. And to speak about abortion publicly as someone who was supposed to die from an abortion? I don't think I can do that. But I always knew the day would come. And I hope that if you've been maybe running from him a little bit, when he's been telling you where you need to go, I hope that you can stop running tonight too. Because you have nothing to be fearful of. And you don't need to worry about having the gifts it takes to fulfill the purpose he has for you. God doesn't call on people to be able. He calls on people to be available. Right? And when you make yourself available to him, you find you have every gift you need to serve him. So I knew that I had an amazing purpose, but I went through years of pain. I was blessed with an amazing family who has always stood by my side. My family is my family. I was blessed with a church that supported me and even a public school that allowed me to speak about what happened to me. But I went through years of pain. And then I went through years of healing that I am so grateful for. Because during those years, I learned so much about who I really am, who God made me to be, who he is, and just how abortion touches all of our lives. I'm thankful for those years. And during those years, I started preparing myself to come forward. I knew it was going to be a battle. And 2 things I wanted to do before I came forward was find my family and obtain my medical records. How many of you in this room have seen the film October Baby? Absolutely. Okay, more hands need to see that film. Lots of places you can see it. You can rent it on Netflix. You can get it through Redbox. You can buy it at Walmart. It's an amazing story of an abortion survivor like me. And like the person in the story that they talk about, I was 19 when I went looking for my family. Most people understand why I wanted my medical records, because I know when you look at me, you think, how could that happen? I get that one a lot. The typical response in the world is, look at her. She looks perfectly normal. I know. I wake up in the skin every single day. I've been doing it for 35 years. And there are some days where I go, whoa, God is really amazing. And I don't forget it. But I know we live in a world that sometimes doesn't respond the way that I do, or maybe you do. So I knew those medical records would be incredibly important, but very difficult to obtain. Sometimes what people don't understand is why I wanted to find my family. The answer for me is quite simple. I love them. I love them so deeply. And I wanted them to know that. I wanted them to know that I forgave them so long ago for that decision that was made to end my life. Just as I want every other man and woman in the world to know who's been affected by abortion that they are forgiven and they are loved. And chances are there's somebody in this room tonight, much like my biological mother and father. And I hope that if you or someone you know is in need of that message, that you give it to them. that you let them know that there are services and supports available to them. The pregnancy center can help them on a path to healing. But I wanted my family to hear it from me before I came forward publicly. And it took me 10 years to find them. It took me 10 years to finally obtain my medical records. I have some cards out on a table tonight. When you leave, you can grab one. But if they happen to be gone by the time you get out the door, which happens sometimes, my website's really simple. It's just Melissa Ohden, OHDEN.com. And on the photos page, you can see copies of my medical records right there on my website, because I want the world to see the truth about abortion. I want the world to see the truth of what it was meant to do to me. In my medical records, you can read statements like, a saline infusion for an abortion was done, but was unsuccessful. That one line always gets me. My life had to result from something being unsuccessful. We know that is not God's plan for any of our lives. And I always have to think about the pregnancy centers when I hear that statement, because I can only imagine how many people walk through the door of the center thinking that their life is not a success because of the circumstance they find themselves in. And thereby their child's life is not a success. And we know we live in a world that wants to define that for us. But that's also the job of the pregnancy center. And we've seen firsthand tonight that they do a beautiful job with it to let people know that their life is a success no matter what. And so is their child's. But through those medical records, not only was I able to read about what I survived and how I fought for my life, but I also learned very quickly who my biological parents were. As I shared, I searched for them for over 10 years, and those were some of the most fruitful but difficult 10 years of my life. Because maybe like me, there's been times in your life where you wanted things to go your way. Am I alone in that? Yes, Lord, I will follow your will as long as it works with my timetable. I've thought that before. And during those 10 years, I kept thinking, come on, you know, I want to come forward. I want to serve you. I want to speak publicly, but I want to find my family first. And I did everything. I had attorneys. I petitioned the courts. I worked for the adoption agency that handled my adoption, because God has a funny sense of humor, I think. You know, I spent many days sitting in my chair, peering across the hallway, thinking, I could just go over there, take a peek. But that wasn't his plan. His plan was much grander than what I was thinking about. Because when I obtained my medical records, they actually performed a pretty big mistake. Maybe you've started to guess by now. They forgot to black out my birth parents' names. So much for walking across the hallway, right? I like to think sometimes God is up there with an eraser. Sometimes he uses it, sometimes he doesn't. That time, he allowed those names to be free and open. And I can not tell you what a joy it was. I just can't tell you what a joy it was to find out who my parents were after 10 years of searching. And I can't tell you what a joy it was to jump on the computer that night and learn that I was living in the very same city as my biological father. Did anybody prepare you and tell you that the fact that I survived an abortion is just a small part of my life? God continues to show up in a mighty way in my life. And I didn't grow up in Sioux City. I had lived about an hour and a half away from there. I moved there to finish my master's degree, knowing that's where my mother's abortion took place, but never thinking that my family was there. And there was my father. And I prayed about it for months. I knew what I was being called to do. I needed to reach out to my father. And I did a couple of months after I found out that we were living in the same city. And I sent him a letter to his office, letting him know everything I've told all of you tonight. You know, that I am so blessed, that I know the truth, that I love him, that I've forgiven him. And I said, you know, I'll be waiting to hear from you if you ever want to just communicate with me or maybe even have a relationship with me. I'll be waiting. And I'm still waiting. And I had spent 10 years preparing for that. You know, certainly knowing how I came into the world made it very clear that maybe my family wouldn't want to have anything to do with me. But what happened in my family's life is much more complicated. I'll get to more of that in a second. About that same time, I reached out to my mother's side of the family. I've never actually found my biological mother herself, because after the abortion took place, my parents' relationship ended like so many do after an abortion. And so I know my mother's maiden name and not her married name, but I knew who her parents were through my years of searching. And I reached out to them, sent them a letter also, asking them to talk to my mother, reach out to her on my behalf. Do you think I ever heard back from them? Trick question, right? I did. Just about 3 days after I sent them a letter, my grandfather responded back to me. Now, if you remember at the very beginning, I made it clear that it was someone else's choice for the abortion to take place. Those very same grandparents that I contacted are the grandparents who played a heavy part in my mother's abortion taking place. But I wouldn't change contacting them for a thing, because they needed to know as much as my mother did that they are loved and they are forgiven. Through my grandfather's letter, I learned a lot of things about my family. 2 very important truths that I learned about my family ring true for a lot of families I've learned when it comes to abortion. First of all, like so many women in our world, my mother has never told anyone about her abortion. And I can't blame her for that. You know, we live in a world that doesn't want to talk about abortion. And certainly when people talk about the pain or the difficulties they've experienced as a result, a lot of times those voices are silenced. And I pray for my mother. I pray for her the same prayer every night that I have since I found that out. That somehow she has found someone to open up to in the last 5 years. And I pray that every night for every woman in our world. Through that letter, the other important truth I learned is that that message of forgiveness I was asking them to pass along wasn't going to be. Because in recent years, they had stopped talking to my mother. Or more correctly, she had stopped talking to them. They were estranged. And I could feel something at the time. I couldn't quite put it into words, what I felt when I read that in the letter. But I understand it now. And maybe some of you can understand it too. If it wasn't my mother's choice to have that abortion, if it was my grandparents who played such a heavy part in it, it makes great sense that their relationship has been forever changed. And sadly, I see it in a lot of families around the world. Whether we talk about it or not, abortion doesn't just end a life and change a life. It changes all of our lives forever. And I am so grateful that Melissa has been able to have a different path. But that was the last time I heard from my mother's family, was back in 2007. And people always ask me if I want to know my mother. Of course I do. But I believe in God's will. And I believe in his timing. And I'm at peace with what he has done in my life. And I truly believe that if he intends for me to know my mother, I will someday. In his time and not mine. But about that time, I also came forward publicly. I hadn't spoken publicly as a survivor for many years. But I knew that it was time. And God put the pieces of the puzzle together for me. The first time I shared my story publicly was about the same time I contacted my family. In the summer of 2007. And the first time I spoke publicly was on Capitol Hill out in Washington, D.C. Not a bad first speaking engagement straight out of the gate, right? I love it when people say, "Did you receive any formal training?" No, I think that's just a big push from God. That's how it usually happens in my life. He says, go for it. I'm always here. And I was out there thinking, I'm so grateful to be doing what my life has been saved for, but I don't know if I can ever do this again. I'm sick to my stomach. I'm a bundle of nerves. I thought I had a really bad case of nerves that first time I shared my story publicly, but what I actually had was a really bad case of morning sickness with our daughter, Olivia, who will be 5 in April. I was just a couple of days pregnant with her that first time I shared my story publicly. And I know that is not a coincidence, as nothing in our lives are. That was a clear sign from God that I was doing exactly what I was intended for. And I found myself, and so did my husband, we found ourselves incredibly blessed. And of course, during my pregnancy with her, I got more involved in pro-life work. I ultimately gave up the life that I intended for myself to do what God intended for me. And I know that's not easy for any of us in this room. You know, the words that people spoke to me at the time was, ministry? You're going to get involved in what? Are there benefits? Yes, there are benefits. Eternal ones. And also there's great benefit that comes from knowing that you're making a difference in people's lives every day, that you are serving God. As I was getting involved in pro-life work more and advocating for people to choose life and understand the consequences of the decisions that we make, what I didn't know was that my father was back home in Iowa fighting for his life. That's ultimately why my father never responded to the letter that I sent him, because he died about 6 months after I sent it. My father was 51 years old, and he died almost to the very day of the anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision. Again, that is not a coincidence in my book. And I didn't know about it at the time. I ended up Googling his name very innocently one night a couple of months later, hoping to read about his life. What I actually read about was his death. And I came face to face with my father through his obituary for the first and last time. And as you can hear in my voice, it still pains me today, because I questioned God heavily that night. You know, I had spent so many years looking for him, finding him, and then he was gone. And I'm sure some of you can relate to what that's like too, to say, how could this happen? And God spoke to me that night and said, Melissa, be patient. I know this is not your plan, but my plan is much greater than the one you had in mind. And it was true, as it always is. As the months unfolded, I learned what God knew and I didn't. What God knew is that my father's family never knew a thing. They never knew about the abortion and the child who lived and was adopted. They never knew about the letter that was sent to his office until he died and they went to clean it out. Here I had thought I was sending the letter there by my own free will. That was the hand of God, knowing what was to come. They found the letter and they uncovered the great secret that my father kept throughout his life. And the truth is, there are probably men in this room like my father tonight. Looking back on his life, my father's family now recognizes some things that he said. About the time that I survived the abortion, he told his brothers he had done something he was so ashamed of that he would never tell a living soul about it. And sadly, he made good on that promise because he carried it to his grave. And as much as I grieve the loss of my father, I understand his legacy is much greater than my grief, because now I can turn to men like you in this room and say, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for supporting Crossroads. Thank you for speaking up for life. And if you've been touched by abortion or you know someone who has, thank you for letting men know it's okay to talk about it and it's okay to grieve. Thank you for doing something my father was never able to do on this earth. And through that letter and finding out the truth about me, my father's family ultimately found me. I was looking for them and they were looking for me, but I was very busy at the time getting prepared to bring Olivia into this world. And if you haven't heard me say enough tonight how great God is, Olivia was born on April 26th of 2008 at St. Luke's Hospital in Sioux City, Iowa, because there is nothing that God can't redeem in this world. If he can redeem that hospital where I was meant to die, to now be a hospital that holds the most beautiful memories of my life, there is nothing that God can't do for anyone in this room. And I so appreciate that Crossroads brings that message to people every single day. Nothing is untouchable to God. Nothing is unredeemable. And that hospital was redeemed. And not long after Olivia was born there, my father's family found me. I first met my great aunt. She's my grandmother's youngest sister. And then I met my grandfather, who was one of the most important people in my life. My family has been changed. They've been changed by learning the truth about what happened in our lives. And they can now make sense of what happened throughout the last 35 years. They can look upon my father's life and all of his great achievements, but also see the suffering and the devastation and the change that came after the abortion took place. And I wish I could stand in front of you tonight and say I have met my entire family and it's been such a great blessing. But it's not that simple. Abortion doesn't save relationships. Abortion changes relationships. And it changes lives forever, and that's when it's done in my family. I have lived historically in Sioux City up until just a couple of weeks ago. My husband and daughter and I just moved to Kansas City for the good weather. Or so we thought. But historically, I've lived in the same city as my biological family for the last almost 5 years. And my grandmother has been living in the same city that I was. My half-sister who's a teenager, my aunts and uncles, my cousins. And over the last 5 years, the only people that I met were my grandfather and my great aunt. Because the rest of the family is still hurting so much. Not only by the loss of my father, but the knowledge of what happened 35 years ago. There is shame, and there is guilt, and there is anger. And I wish I could take that away for them. They have nothing to feel ashamed of. They have nothing to feel guilty about, but they do. They feel guilty that they couldn't save me. They feel ashamed that it happened in our family. They're angry that they would have adopted me if only they had been told about me. And even though I wish it was different, I take comfort in knowing that God continues to heal my family. And I know that this is what he wanted the world to see. That my mother's abortion 35 years ago wasn't just something that was supposed to end my life and forever changed hers, but it touched every single person in my family and has changed our lives forever. And I will tell you, as a mother, I look at my little girl every single day. And I know that she never would have lived if my mother's abortion would have succeeded in ending my life. And if you can see the tears in my eyes, you can understand the depths of my pain as a mother, to understand that reality. I can deal with knowing what happened to me, but knowing that she never would have lived, the pain is horrendous. But there is great joy also when I look at my daughter, because I know that it ends with me. That pain and that suffering ends with me, and the healing has began with me. And by my life being saved 35 years ago, future generations to come like hers have been part of this world. And that's what Crossroads is doing every single day. By saving the lives of people like my mother, they are saving the lives of children like me, and thereby allowing future generations of children just like our Olivia to come. And so on behalf of those children who don't have the opportunity to say thank you, I thank every single one of you at Crossroads and every single one of you here tonight, because I know you are here because you believe in this ministry. And I thank you for that. And I hope that tonight has been a blessing to you. We're going to now move away from the Kleenex portion of the evening, hopefully, myself included, to the part of the evening where you can also learn about how you can be a blessing. Because I know people look upon what I do as a public speaker and someone who does a lot of advocacy and think, good for her. I could never do that. Never say never. But also know that maybe this isn't your calling. Every single one of us, though, have a calling when it comes to the cause of life. And every single one of you have gifts that you can give tonight to the Crossroads ministry so that more lives can be touched and saved, just like Melissa's and Landon's and lives like mine. You know, maybe you are here tonight because you are a prayer warrior. I don't know if you saw, but on the table there are some magnets that say, please pray for us. If you haven't yet started praying for this ministry, maybe tonight is the night for you. Prayer is so powerful. I have met in upwards of 20 people whose prayers saved my life. True story. I'll share that later with anybody who wants to hear it. But maybe your gift you can give tonight is to be a fellow prayer warrior. Maybe you have time and talents that you can offer up to the ministry. Maybe tonight you are here because one of those gifts that you can give is financially. And I know sometimes that's a hard thing to talk about, but it's an important one. We know we can't put a price tag on life. But the truth is, to be able to save and transform lives, there is a financial cost involved. And maybe you came here tonight knowing how much you could give. Maybe you give the same amount every year. And I know every gift you can give is a blessing, and Crossroads is duly thankful for that. But I also believe in the power of the Holy Spirit. And maybe you came here tonight thinking you knew how much you could give, whether it was financially or through your time and talents. But maybe after hearing the two Melissas tonight, you've been moved in a different way. I pray that tonight you give yourself the opportunity to be guided by the Holy Spirit and answer the call that He is giving you tonight. Because in answering the call for me, I've experienced the most immense blessings and joy in my life by simply saying, yes, Lord, I will give of myself. I will make sacrifices. I will do whatever it takes to serve you and make a difference in this world. Tonight is your great opportunity to make sacrifice also. And so I want to invite a very special person up here on the stage, the chairman of the board, Mr. Ron Daggart, who is going to share with you more about how you can offer up your gifts tonight so that more lives can be saved and transformed through Crossroads. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Wow, what do you say to that? I get to follow Melissa. And I get to bring you the bill. It's a real pressure to be here. Thank you, every one of you. For those who support the center, for those who will be supporters of the center. On behalf of the Board of Directors of Crossroads, I give you profound thanks. We are truly grateful for all of you, for the support you give us not only in financially, but in prayer and in service. Abortion is not just another thing in America. Abortion is like a shackle of shame around our ankles. And I believe it's keeping our country from prospering. And I believe we need to press on to do all we can to bring it to an end. Jesus said, inasmuch as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. I believe he's saying he takes it personally, what we do to the least of these. And when we have chosen not to protect the most innocent of life in what ought to be the most safest of sanctuaries, we have indeed put a shackle on our nation. But I believe that with your help, Crossroads can continue changing hearts, saving lives, renewing minds. With your help, we can go press on and make a difference. I am truly grateful to each one of you. I don't come here so much with my hands out as I come here with my hands up praying that God would give you conviction and direction I'd rather have you give out of conviction and direction from God than just an impulsive, emotional thing. I believe that he will direct you in the way that you should go with regard to your service to Crossroads Pregnancy Center. And it's truly a privilege to stand here and offer you this opportunity. How many of you saw Schindler's List? There's a great scene at the end of the movie where the Jewish people who have been rescued by this German industrialist from the Holocaust give him an award. And he starts to weep. And he looks at his ring and he looks at his car and he said, I could have gotten rid of these. I could have done more. It's my desire in that day that we would be able to say, I've done all that God had called me to do, and not regret that we hadn't done more. So my encouragement to you is to ask the Lord for his direction, for his encouragement on what your part of supporting the Crossroads Pregnancy Center should be. And with that, I will do some mechanics. Now, I just returned from Guatemala, and I had the privilege of speaking to a church there in central Guatemala, and they don't pass the basket there. They put out a box, they set it in the front, they start playing music, and everyone sings and dances on their way to the box. You can relax. I think we're a little too Norte Americano to do that. But the Lord does love a cheerful giver. On your table you will find cards. They look like this. On one side of the card, it has a place for you to enter your personal information, your name, your address, your telephone number, email. If you check the box that says you'd like to be on the email list, it will save us postage. Everything but your giving statements would come then by email rather than by snail mail. On the right hand, on this side of the card, there's a box that will allow you to put in information about the amount you would like to give. At the top, it's for a one-time gift. Down below, it's for ongoing support. You're welcome to fill out both of those. On the back, if you care to give by credit card or debit card, there's information on the back to fill out so that can be taken care of. These cards are in the center of your table. Ask you to fill them out just as I filled it out. There's an envelope there. Put the card, when you filled it out, in the envelope along with your check or with whatever else you care to put in there, cash. Seal the envelope and put it in the large white envelope in the center of the table. So with that, I would like to ask Mr. Tim Stickle to come back to the lectern. And God bless you all.